I think as women founders as well, it's more challenging to get venture dollars from the get-go anyways. So we've always been really scrappy and we've used lots of wage subsidies and we've always been creative in our negotiations and figured out how to do it as cheaply as possible.
You're listening to Customer Growth Sessions presented by Intergrowth, where we talk through strategies to help up-and-coming e-commerce businesses bring in more customers. I'm your host, Pat Ahern. Let's jump in. Okay, listeners, welcome back to the latest episode of Customer Growth Sessions. Today, I'm thrilled to have on Jessica Bosman and Bryn Davis-Williams, the co-founders over at DOUBL. Jess, Bryn, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having us, Pat.
Excited to have you on today. Can you start out by giving us an overview? What is DOUBL?
So DOUBL is automating custom fit clothing so that we can get rid of standard sizes forever. So this means that it'll be easier to shop. You won't have to confine yourself or define yourself to a size label. And we're doing that by automating the manufacturing of custom clothing from end to end so that this can be something that's an accessible technology that transforms retail.
Amazing. And can you share the story of how the two of you got started with the business?
Yeah, so Bryn and I met almost a decade ago at the Ivy School of Business. And the first conception, like the first version of DOUBL really came to life in our last year where we did a business project. And we were really fascinated by industries that hadn't had a lot of innovation and how we could completely transform the way that people perceived a particular industry. So around that time, Uber had launched. So we were really inspired by how they had completely shifted our mindset when it came to hiring cars. And there hadn't been very much innovation in women's products specifically. So that was also something that was very dear to our hearts. And Bryn and I shared a spirit of entrepreneurship. So we continued speaking about the idea after we graduated. And despite going into our corporate careers, which sort of also translated into some complementary skills for the business, we had continued talking about it. And then once the tech was in a place that we felt like it was kind of go time, we jumped right in.
And when I first met you two, I think the thing that excited me the most about hearing about DOUBL was that you've connected, I would say, two facets of businesses that I don't see connected very often. And that is one, going the bootstrapped route, and two, going the route of building technology. I was joking with you before that I talk to a lot of bootstrap businesses that don't put resources into technology. And then I've talked to a lot of technology companies that take on huge amounts of investor dollars. First, I want to start talking about bootstrapping. How have you managed to fund the business to date?
Yeah, so we've done everything you can think of when it comes to non-dilutive funding. So that's Bryn and I putting our paychecks into the business. It's using grants and government funding, some debt financing, pitch competitions. I think as women founders as well, it's more challenging to get venture dollars from the get-go anyways. So we've always been really scrappy and we've used lots of wage subsidies and we've always been creative in our negotiations and figured out how to do it as cheaply as possible.
Within that, are there any, let's broadly say, government grants that you found were just these incredible opportunities that maybe you had never heard of until you really started digging deep into how you could fund the business without diluting yourselves?
Yeah, there's quite a few. We've always utilized wage subsidy grants. So that can be particularly helpful depending on what kind of role you're filling. So for example, for customer service or packaging or sales, social media, that can be really helpful. And we've leveraged that a lot. IRAP's been really helpful for us. So they help you in funding all of your IP strategies, so all of your patents, which is hugely important. They also do full youth employment programs. We've also done My Tax, I believe, is ultimately through the government. And we did a travel subsidy through them. And that's really challenging to find, is some money that allows founders to travel for investor conversations or for pop-ups or accelerators in different cities. That's really helpful. We've also done some matching grants, either federally or provincially. So that's also been great. They're normally project-based. So you say, we're using this money to, bring our technology to the next level or hit this milestone. And those are really, really helpful because obviously the small business cash flow is everything. So it's sort of how are you getting to that next payroll or to that software that you need to pay for? So they're the big ones that come to mind. Idea Fund was really helpful for us. That was one of the matching grants, which I believe is provincial.
And Shred.
Oh yeah, Shred is really helpful as well. So if you're a technical team or if you're doing any novel research and development.
So let's talk about the technology side of the business a little bit. First of all, can you give us an overview? What is the technology behind Double?
Yeah, so the technology has been a journey, I would say. So we're unique in the sense that we're creating an end-to-end supply chain. So we're not just creating one unique element. We're truly transforming the way retail operates from coming to the website and making your purchase right down to the way that it's manufactured. So with that said, we do license some of the elements of our tech stack currently. So that's how we got started, I would say, is that we're first-time founders. So we were trying to figure out what existed in the market and what was necessary for us to build. So anything that we have, so for example, our scanning technology, there's lots of companies on the market that are currently doing this. And usually it's for tracking weight, like BMI, or for men's suiting, for example. So that was something that we didn't feel like we had to build because there was already exceptional companies doing that. So that was something that we could easily license. And then that would allow us to scale more quickly. So what's really unique and what's our IP is sort of the centerpiece. So where the patterns, or for those who aren't familiar with the retail industry, so every item is made through a 2D pattern. So the t-shirt that you're wearing is probably 2 to 5 pieces that you could kind of draw on a piece of paper, and then you would cut that out and sew it together to create your 3D garment. So that's the piece that we're really focused on, is this pattern making element and allowing that to be done automatically so that we can scale. So right now, the retail industry, the reason that on-demand manufacturing and custom at scale has never been possible is because you have to go in person for multiple fittings, and then you need to confirm the fit, and then you submit that to your factory, and they cut many, many, many numbers of them. So basically, we're focused on this automatically changing of the pattern pieces to fit your body perfectly. So that's where our IP is. We had started with a manual version of it, which in its first inception really started as just like a statistical algorithm that Bryn and I created in her kitchen. And then from there, it's developed with a lot of the pattern making softwares and 3D avatar type components in the market. So it's a little bit convoluted, but that's sort of where we're focused on.
No, that's amazing. And one of the things I wanted to dive into deeper within there is, and I'm glad you brought this up, the idea of when do you go about leveraging existing technology versus deciding, I'm going to build out this technology in-house. You mentioned there's a couple technologies that you're currently partnering. So how did you go about assessing these ones in particular and saying, okay, these ones are totally sufficient versus these ones really aren't good enough at X, Y, and Z. This is where we really need to build out our own function.
Yeah, I think Bryn talks to this very well, the kind of like build, buy, or purchase, I think it is, model. And the way that we thought about it was, is it worth our time and money and resources to build this from scratch if it already exists in the market? And how will that impede our speed to market? Because I think as a startup, what you have to your advantage is speed to market and your ability to be agile and act quickly and pivot quickly. So if it's going to take you 5-10 years to build something that already exists in the market, what value are you bringing? And during that time, could somebody else bring to market what your idea is? So that's the way we really looked at it, and comparing costs of licensing compared to building. And a lot of technologies ultimately aren't worth building. So the one that we're building is something that just doesn't exist in the market. And that's really what is at the core of Double. And that's why we chose to build out that piece. And then the rest we've licensed.
And within that, let's talk a little about, like, going way back. Let's talk about version 1 of this technology. How did you go about assessing, what were the absolutely essential features that needed to go into version 1 versus maybe what were some of, like, the term I would use is bells and whistles, but what were some of those non-essential features that you maybe said, hey, I'd love to build this out 6 years from now, but we definitely can't build this into version 1?
I think what was really fascinating for us is that we thought one of the reasons that nobody had tackled bras specifically before, and also why it was our focus, was that it's the most difficult part of the body to fit because it's soft tissue, it's malleable. The girls are sisters, not twins. Everyone has a different body. They have different experiences based on potentially having had children or having gone into menopause. So there's just so many factors to consider. And right now in the bra industry, they're only taking into consideration the underband and band measurements. So that's 2 static measurements for these 3-dimensional malleable body parts. So what we really wanted to take into consideration initially was shape. So nobody was accounting for the unique shape, and nobody was accounting for like surface area or density or weight. So all of these 3-dimensional measurement points, everyone was just doing 2-dimensional. So that was our first idea. So when we first did our first prototype, we were really thinking about shape. So we had initially classified people into, like full, minimal, or teardrop. And we had ourselves classifying people, and we had people classifying themselves. So this wasn't the perfect way of doing things because it's difficult to assess shape, and people don't really assess their own shape well. And we weren't always assessing people's shape well either. So we kind of strayed away from that. But then we kind of went into a secondary version of it, which was like we used A, B, and C, which is confusing because there are A, B, and C cups in the market. And that's not what it was for us, but it was basically 3 different starting points for the pattern based on your shape and the level of support that you needed. And again, this worked better than the first version. However, it still wasn't perfect because, again, we were having people self-select. And again, people weren't necessarily selecting the correct one, which is interesting. So it's not everyone understands if they're needing more support or less support, or it also intersects with personal preference. Like maybe you do need more support, but your aesthetic is a less support bra. So again, we scrapped that, and then we really leaned into the 3-dimensional avatars. So we really do now use a digital twin of your body. And through that, we can see exactly where your weight and surface area is lying. And then we just self-select for you. And we have just decided to have now a more support and a less support, but that's internal. So if you need the additional support in your bust, there'll be an additional kind of piece of fabric in the undercup to give you that lift. And then otherwise, as a customer, all you select is your color preference and your strap preference. And if we feel really strongly about your strap preference being incorrect, we'll email you. But otherwise, so that's been very helpful, but we still consider all of those 3-dimensional measurements. So that's continued to be consistent and important. The way that we target shape is just a little bit different now.
Tell me if this sounds like you. You've started scaling the business through PPC channels like Facebook, but now it eats up 80% of your marketing budget, and ad costs continue to rise, pushing your margins down more and more every month. PPC is great for scaling your business in the early stages. The issue is PPC is like a faucet. As soon as you stop spending money, the sales instantly go away. So rather than paying per customer, we work with brands to build a steady stream of new customers through SEO. Those customers continue to flow for years after brands stop working with us. Interested in hearing more? Reach out to us directly at intergrowth.com/CGS to book a complimentary strategy session with our team.
So I love what you're sharing. And a big part of what I heard there is version 1 of the technology really focused on asking customers to self-select, which it sounds like it was a really good starting point, but there were a lot of flaws in that model, and that ultimately led you to build out what eventually became the 3D avatar. How did you go about iterating the technology as you started collecting this feedback from consumers and started realizing, hey, maybe this isn't quite as good as we're really looking to build in long term?
Yeah, Pat, I'd love to bring you back to square one too. I think that would be helpful. So when Bryn and I were very first tackling this problem, we quite literally Googled like how to make a bra. Like we really started from nothing. And our very first prototype was somebody that we'd hired on Upwork, and she had some experience at some major bra companies. And we sent her images of bras that we loved, and we'd still obviously had this idea of customization. So I can't even remember how we sent any unique measurements. I think we were just starting with the style at that point. We were designing the bra itself, and the bra came back and it was nothing like how we envisioned it. And so that was our jumping off point, I would say. So then we realized that we needed somebody probably closer by that we could speak to and meet with in person. So over the first probably 2 years, we went through a few different people. So Bryn and I, like, we don't have pattern making experience. We're not designers, and those roles were critical for Double. So we went through a few different people in both roles. And I think that was something that we learned over a lot of time, that it's really important bringing on the right person on your team, which can be challenging because as a startup, you have limited resources and you're looking for people that believe in your vision as much as you do, which is really challenging because it's a huge risk that they're taking. So it took us a while to get to the right person. However, in that time, we did get to the basic design that we were liking, which was a t-shirt bra that gave support through the design itself. And we wanted something that was not a sports bra, not a bralette, but not a traditional bra that had underwire and padded foam, because those were the main complaints that women had. It's really uncomfortable to have wire and foam on your body the whole day. It's hot, it's painful. So that was sort of our ethos when we were designing the actual bra itself. And then we actually had a sewer. I was in Vancouver at the time, and there was this sort of WeWork space that had sewing machines. It was sort of like a technical WeWork space, I guess. So she was there and she would be sewing the bras. And at that time, we were using this sort of manual algorithm. So initially, we were taking manual measurements, and then we would compare the difference in measurements from kind of like one person to the next, and how that would therefore affect the change in each individual piece. So as you can imagine, this only worked a higher percentage of the time than I think we expected. So it sort of worked, it sort of didn't work. And at that time, we didn't have a more sophisticated way of capturing people's measurements. So I think in that initial stage, we learned we need very high measurement accuracy. That's extremely important. And we need a way to compare people's bodies that isn't going to take very much time. So that's what led us to the onboarding of our first technology, which is this 3D measurement system. So essentially, you scan your body using your phone. It takes less than a minute. You're fully clothed. And again, as I mentioned earlier, there's lots of players doing this. So we went through a few different companies to see which one was most accurate in the bust area in particular. So that was sort of our first big onboard. And then we continued doing it as usual with this sort of algorithm. And then we weren't getting the accuracy that we needed, and the technology in the industry was changing lots. So we started seeing, my background's in retail, so I started seeing people using this 3D pattern making design system, which nobody's used it for what we're using it for, but it existed. So then I was like, that's really fascinating. The idea of using 3-dimensional avatars that reflect people's bodies and using their actual bodies versus mannequins. So that's when we onboarded our secondary software system, which allows us to bring people's 3-dimensional bodies to life. So then instead of working off of 2-dimensional measurements, we're working off 3-dimensional measurements. And that allowed us to also then use heat maps and stress tests to take into consideration the actual composition of fabric and see how it was interacting with that person's body. Again, it's still not a perfect science. We're getting there. But as you can imagine, the underband and the straps need to be tighter, for example, than the bust. So then we started learning what those, like what the heat map should kind of look like in order to get the perfect fit every single time. And then as we start interacting with customers, we learned this was a perfect fit, this was not a perfect fit, this was almost. Then we start training our manual model essentially. And our ultimate goal is to have a generative AI model, which again, we don't have a technical background, but we've hired out every role that isn't in our wheelhouse. So just ensuring that we have the support around us. So bringing on mentors in the space, or right now we're in the next AI program. So that's been really helpful. So leveraging those resources to ensure that we bring on the right person. That's something I would definitely recommend to other founders is accelerators, get involved in your network. And then that way you can hire properly. And we've definitely learned the hire slow, fire fast. So making sure that you do get the right people and that you're not wasting your resources on people that aren't adding value, despite that being challenging. So anyway, that was a long-winded answer, but that's sort of where we've gotten to now without having a technical background. And we've just learned over many years as to kind of like what's the next logical step.
And I'm so glad that you hit upon that point of, partnering with accelerators or joining accelerators and being able to learn from them. One of the big questions I wanted to get into today touches upon that. And that is, not coming from a technical background, how do you go about hiring for these extremely technical roles? Let's say either an AI engineer or pattern maker. I'll let you choose which you think is a better example that we can look at. But without really strong expertise in these fields, how do you go about assessing whether someone really is qualified to take on the work?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'll use the machine learning engineer as the example because it was the most out of our wheelhouse hire that we've done. So how we approached it is, I think, something that we've learned over time. If you look up Who Hiring Book, you'll find it, and they really walk you through a guided step-by-step kind of screening and technical interview process and review process. So that was helpful. I think when we first started hiring, it was really informal. And I think it's really important that you spend enough time with the applicant and you're looking for not only that they're competent for the work that they're going to be doing, but that they're also a good fit for your team culturally. So in this role, for example, it was really important for this person to be a strong communicator because like you need to dumb it down for us. So how can you, translate the work that you're doing into non-technical terms? And so that was, for example, one of the big points that we were looking for during the hiring process. And then when it came to putting the job description together, I think one way of doing it is looking at other companies that are hiring for that role that may be similar to you or the role is similar and looking to their job descriptions. We have a scientist in residence through Next AI and she helped me put it together. So yeah, I had very little expertise there. So kind of a combination of the two. And then I did a screening interview myself. So that was sort of more of that, tell me about yourself. How are they communicating? Can they explain their relevant experience to me? How are they a good cultural fit? And then we always do a technical interview. And for that interview, I brought on our deep tech mentor as well as our scientist in residence. So they handled the technical questions and then they gave me their feedback. And then we did an assignment. That's something I always recommend. The assignment was also put together by our scientist in residence. So we really do leverage our resources where we can. That would have been a challenging thing to do without knowing someone, I think. But I do think it's important. You get a lot of tell on a person's competency when it comes to doing an assignment. And then the final interview was a cultural fit interview with Bryn and one of our senior technical pattern makers who they would be spending a lot of time with. So it was a total of like 4 interviews and very much leveraging the resources that we had on our end.
And I'll just mention as a quick sidebar, I am a huge fan of doing the paid test projects as well. We've seen it is so effective in figuring out whether someone is likely going to be a good long-term fit or not. It can be tough to do for full-time roles, but I mean, especially if you're hiring a contractor, I always say, I recommend setting aside, maybe it's $500, $1,000, see if you can set up a couple hours of their time, pay them for the work, regardless of whether it's good quality or not. It saved us from some hires that really wouldn't have worked out in the long term. And I'm glad to hear it's worked out well for you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And we haven't actually even done paid assignments. It was just part of the interview process and sort of that showing whether or not you're dedicated to, the startup culture. You're probably making a little bit less money than you maybe would in a different role, but the upwards potential is huge. And the opportunity to become senior, to have equity is much more likely, which I think is a great opportunity.
Absolutely. And I love another one of the points you hit on, which it sounds like what you've done is a lot of leveraging your network of advisors, of mentors, getting them to help out with some of the technical interview side of things. Do you mind me asking how you compensate those mentors or those advisors from it? Or is it just the type of thing where you say, hey, 2 people I want you to interview, can you do this, kind of as a favor for us and take an hour of your time to do this?
Yeah, we've always been fortunate and our mentors have always donated their time to us, which has been really wonderful. The scientist in resident that I'm speaking of is a part of the resources given to us through Next AI. So she has a certain amount of hours per week that's dedicated to the teams that are beneath her. So that worked out really well. So the hours that she's, given to us, we've utilized, we focused it towards hiring. And then otherwise, our mentors, we always just try to be respectful of their time and not over ask. But if it's an hour or two every month, something like that. And typically they're doing it because they've been in our shoes and they want to give back to the entrepreneurship community.
Absolutely. And a big theme that I've heard so far today is what I perceive was a lot of getting feedback from customers, talking to customers, finding out that, hey, this version of the tech is good, but it could be better. And here's some of the areas that aren't as strong as we want it to be. I would say it is really hard to get customers to share candid feedback. And I'm curious, how have you gone about doing that so successfully? How do you get customers to speak so openly about their thoughts on the product?
Yeah, so I think the most important thing is to have people put money down, right? Because people will be a lot more critical if they've spent their hardworking money towards whatever you're building. So that's the first thing I would say. I also think you have to ask the right questions. And so something Jess and I are noticing now in our customer interviews is that the answers that we're getting are starting to converge in the questions we're asking. So we're starting to now come up with a new list of questions to ask to learn more. And then we've had some focus groups where we've, had people donate their time as well. I think to draw this into the technical piece, often risk is talked about from two sides, so market risk and technical risk. And most companies de-risk on the technical side. So they want to make sure that whatever they're dreaming up, they can build. But it's a we will build it, they will come mentality. And Jess and I took the opposite approach of, okay, let's get what is good enough out there, make sure people are willing to pay for the solution, and then figure out where we need to shift, pivot, and adjust. The route that we have taken is not a profitable route, right? I mean, neither are, but one is a lot of upfront capital, which is why a raise is important. And the other is, we're doing a lot of remakes behind the scenes when things aren't accurate enough. And so we're losing money on most of the products that we're selling, but we're getting market feedback, we're getting traction, we're understanding where the gaps are, where to be investing our time. So there are two different approaches. I like to think that the approach we've taken has a lot more, you just end up, I think, wasting less time because you're staying really focused.
And I'm curious within that. So given that you're approaching this from a bootstrap standpoint, it's not like you have $2 million round of funding that's just sitting in the corporate bank account that you say, okay, we can pull upon this for the next 12 months, 24 months, whatever it may be. How do you go about budgeting for different technology innovations? Do you set out, let's say we're halfway through 2025. Did you set out in, January or December 2024 and say, okay, here is the budget that we're going to look to allocate. We're going to plan on spending X dollars in Q1. Here's how we're going to put aside those dollars. Here's how much we're going to spend Q2, Q3. Or is it a little bit more malleable based on just the feedback you get in real time from customers?
Yeah, it's much more malleable. I would say, to Bryn's point, the nice thing about us getting feedback immediately is that we always have a next most important item, and we put all of our resources or most of our resources into that. So for example, when we launched, first to back up, launching was important. So all of our resources went into Kickstarter. How could we promote the Kickstarter? How could we create the Kickstarter? And then we think about what can we do ourselves, which most of the time we can do a lot ourselves, and what should we put money towards. So for example, we put a little bit of money towards paid media, paid ads to get the Kickstarter rolling a little bit, but then we did the Kickstarter entirely in-house. We didn't hire an agency. And then, for example, now we're looking at automation. So right now it's okay, we've proven the manual solution and we're getting great feedback. We feel confident that this is the right path. However, we need it to be a little bit more accurate and we need to be faster. So that's why our current focus is automation and bringing on a machine learning engineer. And when it comes to budgeting, since we've bootstrapped, it's always more of a we'll figure it out. We find a way, there's always money somewhere. So, we're just always applying for grants, and we're always, if we need more money, we'll look for debt financing. And yeah, we've just always had a mentality that we'll figure it out, and we just always have.
And Jess and I were working on and off at other jobs for the last 5 years. So this was very much like evenings and weekends. We've only been full-time together as of the last couple months. And that's not for everybody. It's definitely a grind, but that allowed us to take any paychecks that we were earning from those jobs and put them directly into the business and self-finance a lot of the business. So yeah, not for the weak of heart, I would say. And you have to really believe in what you're building. And we will eventually get to a point where we raise it. I don't know many companies that have fully bootstrapped, like if they're a tech company, but it was important for us to build out the traction, build out the proof of concept, and that makes us a lot more investable. Now we need to make sure that we have, the IP secured, and I think that really paints a nice story. But yeah, I think that was our approach in terms of bootstrapping to this point in time, to then use investment dollars to really scale versus using investment dollars to prove out something that may or may not be true.
Struggling to get new customers? We're here to help. Hey, this is Pat, the host of Customer Growth Sessions. Our agency, Intergrowth, has been helping e-commerce brands like Bella Bridesmaids, Brevity, and JS Dental to get more customers online since 2016. Interested in seeing how we'd help you? Head over to intergrowth.com/CGS to book a complimentary consultation with me. That's intergrowth.com/CGS. All right, back to the show.
And I would really like to hear your thoughts as well, a little bit more on, working on the business, what I would imagine was nights and weekends. Well, you had a full-time job. With Intergrowth, this business, I did that for, I think it was 6 months. And that's a very short period of time in the grand scheme of things to be running your business on the side. But that was exhausting for me. How have the two of you approached it to make sure you're continuing making progress on Double while it sounds like in many cases working a full-time job, but also avoiding burnout over the course of several years of doing that? That's amazing.
Yeah. I don't know if you've solved that one for you. I think it helps to have two people, right? Because you can be burnt out individually at different times and we can help each other out. I think we're also maybe we've been a bit slower than we could have been if we'd been full-time, but then also the technology wasn't ready yet. So we've just taken a different path, I would say. I think we've also made sure that we have a culture of taking care of ourselves and spending time outside of the business. There's some rhetoric I find with entrepreneurs around you have to cut off your friends and family and anything you like to do and just focus on your business. And maybe that's the ticket to being an overnight success. We certainly are not an overnight success, but we also still have friendships and relationships and hobbies. So I think it's just, you have to really cut out the crap, right? So we don't watch a ton of TV if we're not working while watching. We don't spend time with people that don't fill up our cup. You really just cut out things that aren't bringing you value. And then that means that you can just focus on what does. But when we were working full-time jobs, I wouldn't say we were very good at having a dedicated focus. A lot of the time I spent with my husband, I was also working, or if we'd watch a show together, I'd be working at the same time. Or during my full-time job, I was doing double things. And I was always thinking it wasn't very chunked. And so now I think without the extra job, I'm better able to say okay, I'm carving this time out for this specifically. And that's definitely, I think, a better approach. But it's hard to do when you have so many things. They just bleed into each other.
I love the candid answer. Yeah, I don't know many people who can get that right in the long term, but it sounds like the two of you made it work.
Yeah. The other thing I've been talking about a lot, because I've just been thinking about it more, is that there's a lot of conversation about work-life balance. And a lot of people don't like the word balance because it suggests that there's an evenness. And then people talk about integration. But to me, that's problematic because, again, it's that bleeding into each other where you don't have dedicated time carved out. So the way I've started thinking about it is cup filling versus cup draining activities. So you don't need to balance work and life. You just need to balance the things that don't bring you energy and the things that do. And that I found has been a more helpful schematic to avoiding burnout. So if I'm doing a lot of things in the business, for example, that are draining me, then I know I need to take some time to do an activity that fills my cup. Maybe that's going for a walk outside or spending time with a friend. But if I'm having a week where I'm doing a lot of stuff in the business that's filling my cup up, that I'm excited about, that I like to do, I don't need to take as much of that time, outside of work to fill up my cup because it's already filled. And I think as we grow the team, you start to outsource the tasks that you're not good at, that don't fill your cup, and then you can start to get growth that way. And obviously, there's some things in your life too that don't fill up your cup. And so, you just have to be looking at your week that way, I find has been helpful.
Yeah. And I think we've heard so many stories. At the end of the day, the entrepreneurs that typically make it are the ones that stick it out, right? Like it's a long game, not a short one. So what can you do to get yourself through that marathon? And I think Bryn and I have learned so much through our relationship. Like we've been best friends for 10 years and we've been business partners for 5 years. And we think of each other as spouses, essentially. And we share our insane Google calendars with each other, which does incorporate personal time. So then we can also be respectful of each other's time and have conversations that aren't always business related. And I think we've learned so much about communication and how to make this work for ourselves, and leaning into it as a decision, I think, is really important. Like, you've chosen this and this is what you believe in, and you're putting this work into it because it's creating the life that you've dreamed of. And on the hard days, to remind yourself of that. And again, having a co-founder is so helpful for that. I think solo founders, that must be so challenging. So it's always important to have somebody that you can speak to in the founder community that gets it.
Wow, amazing. I couldn't think of a better way to wrap up. Before I let the two of you go back to your day, first of all, where can listeners buy Double products online?
Yeah, so you can go to our website, mydouble.com, and that's MYDOUBL.com.
Brilliant. Where should listeners go if they want to follow, let's say, the two of you on social, or if they want to follow Double on social?
My personal social is private. I don't have the personal brand going right now, but Double is at MYDOUBL. So same as the website, just as the handle. And we're across Instagram, TikTok, LinkedIn, and YouTube.
Brilliant. Brilliant. Well, once again, listeners, this is Jessica Bosman and Bryn Davis-Williams, the co-founders over at Double. Jess, Bryn, thank you for coming on today.
Thanks, Pat.
Thanks so much, Pat.
Thanks for tuning in to Customer Growth Sessions. If you found it helpful, subscribe and give us a review. It helps us to grow the show. Looking for more SEO guidance on how to grow your business? Contact us at intergrowth.com/estimator or email me directly. You can reach me at pat@intergrowth.com. That's all for today. We'll see you again soon.